Written by u/Carl 1961. People think I'm a serial killer, it's far worse than that. Part 6. I was off the next 2 days. I didn't let them go to waste by staying in my apartment or hanging out with my new friends. Instead, I began to search. I wandered the city, up and down the sidewalks, through parks and parking lots, pretending to browse in shops and department stores. I took the subway from one end of town to the other, then back again. I was watching people. Everyone I saw, I studied them carefully, trying to be discreet. I watched the crowds of pedestrians on the sidewalks, the commuters who rode the subway, the young trophy wives and career women who went shopping at the more upscale department stores, the bohemian artists and lovers seated at the outdoor cafes, the people enjoying their day in the park. Indian summer had arrived and it was unseasonably warm, the people dining in the fast food restaurants where I went to eat my meals. I watched everyone I saw, carefully studying their faces for the slightest flicker, the slightest discrepancy. I tried to appear casual, indifferent. I imagined that to most people I had the look of your usual, fish-out-of-water small-town tourist newly arrived in town and just seeing the city for the first time. I spent that entire first day doing that, and when it got dark I returned to my apartment having learned nothing. I wondered again if I might just be imagining all of this. I fell into a troubled sleep. The next day I repeated the process. It was a gorgeous bright fall day, the trees in the park lush with the dazzling colors of autumn foliage, red, orange, yellow, but I took no notice. The novelty of being able to see again had worn off. And I was on a mission. I began to lose hope as the day drifted towards early evening and the sun began to set. I hadn't encountered anything out of the ordinary. Not one person whose face had given even the subtlest indication that they weren't what they appeared to be. I was just about to give up and return home, when it happened. A man was walking down the sidewalk on the other side of the street, going in the opposite direction. He was a young guy, probably mid-20s, and had the rakish good looks and fashion of your typical rich playboy leading a carefree lifestyle of casual debauchery, a casual Armani suit, shirt unbuttoned at the throat to display a gold chain, matching Rolex on one wrist. The kind of pampered, entitled scumbag who lived in a penthouse and survived off daddy's trust fund and always had cocaine residue around his nostrils and spent his nights in clubs picking up women he would never see again after the next morning. I gave him a cursory glance, and his face rippled. My heart skipped a beat. His face wavered, distorting before transforming into that black, formless void I knew so well. His soulless red eyes glowed in the near darkness. He continued on his way down the sidewalk. I stood there for a moment, feeling a brief flicker of indecision. Then I crossed the street and began to follow after him. He walked unhurriedly but purposefully, seemingly with some destination in mind. I tracked him from a cautious distance behind, careful to avoid detection. I followed him for over an hour as the sun finished setting and nightfall descended. The street lights came on automatically. The crowds of pedestrians gradually dried up and the streets became less populated. I followed him, or rather, it, to the very outskirts of the city, into the industrial district, warehouses and factories surrounding us, smokestacks towering to the night sky, colossal black shapes against a backdrop of navy blue sky dotted with stars. The streets became increasingly deserted until it was just the two of us, and an occasional wino huddled around a fire drum, none of whom paid us any mind. The area became more rundown and dilapidated the further we walked, the street littered with trash, burned-out cars on the curbs, brick walls covered with spray-painted gang graffiti. Some of the buildings were long abandoned, their windows boarded up, except for those that had been broken into by squatters and junkies looking for a place to shoot up. A lot of the street lights had been smashed out and it was much darker here. I became scared, not just because of the strange entity I was pursuing. This was a bad part of town to be in during the day, and here I was smack dab in the middle of it at night. I scanned my surroundings cautiously, eyeing any potential hiding places in the thick shadows where I half expected to be ambushed any second by a mugger or a drug addict or a gang. At last my quarry stopped, about 50 yards ahead of me, and turned down an alleyway between a meatpacking plant and a half-burned-down warehouse, disappearing from view. I stopped there, debating with myself if I should continue after him. It could be a trap, maybe he had caught on that someone was following him. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home, to just forget about the whole thing. Part of me didn't want to know the answer to this mystery, to just leave it alone and resume living my average everyday life. But I had already come too far. I had to know. I went to the mouth of the alley, walking as quietly as possible, and peered in. At first I was confused by what I was seeing. 30 feet away, the young man/thing was standing with its back to me, holding a young girl in a tight lover's embrace. They at first appeared to be kissing, but then I noticed that their mouths were not actually touching. The thing had its mouth, or rather the empty black space where its mouth should have been, about 3 inches away from the girl's parted lips. He/it appeared to be hyperventilating, sharp, rapid intakes of breath. But he didn't seem to be exhaling, only inhaling. I can't explain it any better than that. It looked like he was performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in reverse, and instead of blowing air into the girl's lungs, he was sucking air out. Then I saw the expression on the girl's face, a frozen look of pure, helpless terror. She seemed to be paralyzed in the arms of the thing that held her. As I watched, she went slack, going limp in its arms, as if she had passed out. It let her go and she dropped to the pavement like a sack of potatoes. I was so dumbstruck with confusion and shock, I just stood there transfixed, instead of ducking out of sight. The thing in the casual Armani suit turned to leave, and stopped in its tracks, its burning red gaze locked upon me. For a long, seemingly endless moment, neither of us reacted, we just stared at each other. Fleetingly, I felt an absurd, insane sense of awkward embarrassment, the way you might feel when you walk in on someone doing something private that you shouldn't be seeing. Then the thing spoke to me, and its voice was completely ordinary and human, the slightly anxious voice of a man in his 20s with a trace of panic that I knew was totally bogus. "Hey, man. You better call 911 quick. I think this chick's having a heart attack or something." I was bewildered by this for a second, then it dawned on me that the creature wasn't yet aware that I could see past its facade and knew it wasn't human. I stared at it, wide-eyed, and asked it in a low, nearly strengthless voice, "What are you?" Its body noticeably tensed and I think it understood at that moment that I could see through its deception. "What the fuck are you?" I asked it again. It didn't answer me. Instead, it let out an unearthly, high-pitched howl and suddenly charged at me, moving with shocking speed, hurling towards me like a bullet. Part of my brain told me to turn and flee, but I didn't listen. I acted purely on instinct, not pausing to analyze my actions. I grabbed a 4-foot length of rusty iron pipe from a heap of junk beside me and as the thing closed in, I swung at its head. The pipe connected solidly with its head with a thwack. Sound and the shadow-faced thing tumbled to the ground at my feet. In a burst of frantic, terrified adrenaline, I swung the pipe into its head over and over in a wild frenzy. I felt blood spatter my face. When I finally stopped, sometime later, I let the pipe fall from my hands and clang to the ground. It lay there, motionless, covered in blood, and I knew it was dead. I stood there, gasping over its body, then stepped over it and approached the girl to see if I could help her. She lay there, already pale, her eyes staring dully up at the night sky, not breathing. I could tell without having to check that she was dead. She looked very young, maybe 16 at the most, and was pretty, with bleached blonde hair, but at the same time had a certain harshness, a worn quality to her face, as if she had been prematurely aging from a tough life on the streets. She was wearing high heels, a short leather miniskirt and a fishnet top with no bra underneath, and I had a good idea what her profession had been. I went back to the mouth of the alley, stepping over the corpse of the thing that had killed her to leave, and as I glanced down at it, I felt a fresh sense of horror rising within me. The thing's face had reverted back to that of the young man I had originally seen. A perfectly normal, human face, albeit covered in blood, glazed eyes opened in shock, mouth agape, as if he had been trying to scream or call for help when he died. His skull had been split open from the force of the bludgeoning I had given him, and blood and a pink, pulpy substance I knew had to be brain matter, was slowly leaking out of his head and forming a puddle on the pavement. Gagging, trying not to throw up, I fled the alley and ran off into the night.